I should have known from a very early age that adventure was going to be something that would always come my way. Wherever I went, whatever I did, there was always going to be something happening. Before I go too far, though, I think I need to tell you what an adventure really is. Because an adventure is a journey or an undertaking that involves risk. We've got to have risk to have adventure. Now here I am, 6 years old, having one of my earliest adventures. That is me in the Spider-Man t-shirt. And I'm on what many people know as the Snowdon Mountain Railway. Who's been on it? One or two of you. Okay. Now here I am, it's 1976. I'm on the train with my sister, great hat. And the train had to stop halfway up the mountain because one of the rails fell off. We had to all get off the train while they repaired it to stop the train flying backwards into the bottom and killing everybody. I should have known from that stage that it was always going to be a life of adventure. As I got a little older, I travelled more and more around the world, and I was lucky enough to go on what was called Operation Rally and go to South America and travel to Chile. And it was at this point I started to understand a little more about communication, because I went away for 11 weeks. And in that 11 weeks, I had to somehow, of course, tell everybody what I was doing, and people tried to contact me. The issue was we were remote. We were in the middle of nowhere. And so the only way we could receive any kind of communication was by letter. And they were posted, and we picked them up 5.5 weeks into the trip. That was the first time you saw post. You also wrote your letters, and the first time you could post them back was 5.5 weeks into the trip. I still have some of those letters. Here they are, from 1994, when I was out on expedition, and a newspaper that was posted to me by a friend so that we could catch up on the news at home. That was the only medium we had. We had this newspaper in pieces. I had 110 people reading a newspaper for a week to try and work out what was going on. Because to us, that's all we could do. Everything that was going wrong or right in your life, you couldn't send a message, you tried to write it down, or you got on with it, you took the risk, and you had your adventure. Things moved on, I travelled more, and technology started to catch up a little. I went out to Alaska and climbed a peak called Mount McKinley, also known as Denali. And this was a defining moment in my life. Again, no way of communicating with anybody at home, but we were given a handheld CB radio, basically, and it was for an emergency use only to talk to base camp just in case everything went wrong. Well, it did. I was part of a team that got stuck in a horrendous mountain storm, and we had to make that emergency call. And that emergency call was 2 radio messages that saved our lives. That was all we could make because of the temperatures and the environment we were in. We were lucky to be able to make that simple form of communication. That's what I looked like 2 days after I came off the mountain. I'm always delightful in my pictures. I always try and look my best. I know on Facebook at the moment we've got selfies with no makeup. Hey, there you go. And I spent the next few months, in fact years in hospital, trying to recover, trying to communicate with the world outside, but also trying to get the fact that these were stuck on the end of my body and I didn't have a choice. If anybody tells you, by the way, you can't walk without toes, they're wrong. As time moved on, obviously I moved on, and I wanted to do more and more adventures. Before I go into that, though, what I'd like to do is give you a bit of a timeline about how communication has changed our lives and gone into adventure. 1838 was one of the first milestones when Cook and Wheatstone developed the first commercial telegraph. It was on the Great Western Railway, and it went about 13 to 16 miles of wire. The same year that Samuel Morse invented the Morse code. 1876, Alexander Graham Bell made the world's first long-distance telephone calls. Anybody think they know how far that was? 6 miles. 1901 was a big stepping point, though. Marconi started doing transatlantic experiments with radio. This is where we started to shrink the world. And in 1910, Dr. Crippen was the first person to be caught by the use of radio message, because the radio message could be sent across the Atlantic faster than the boat, basically. That's all in the past. That's all way before us. But 1989 and 1999 are not. 89 was to the birth of what we now know as the internet. 1999, the year I was recovered off Mount McKinley, was the birth of Wi-Fi. These last two dates have had a massive impact on the world of communication and the world of adventure. 1953 was probably one of the most setting moments in mountaineering. It was the 30th of May and we summited Everest. It took till the 2nd of June to get the news back to the UK because it was sent by runner. A coded message had to be written, put in an envelope, given to a runner, run to a telegraph station, to a telegraph station, to a radio station, to be sent to the UK. And the news was pronounced on the day of the coronation. It was probably the very last piece of major world news to be delivered by a runner because technology was starting to overtake the world. The communication methods that we had were moving so fast. Now, I work in the mountains, I go out into the mountains, and I navigate in the mountains. Navigation is communication, how we get from A to B. I always use a good old-fashioned magnetic compass. It works. But we've seen in the outdoors in the past 10 to 20 years, things like phones coming now, mobile devices with compasses. We've seen GPS make a massive leap into the world of communication and adventure. What you've got to remember is this, though. The first one, the magnetic compass, is a tool. The other two are aids. We've had a number of people in the outdoors using a compass on a telephone as a form of communication. They've dropped it, it's got too cold, or the batteries have gone flat. It doesn't work. We've actually also had people going into the mountains of North Wales armed with a phone compass and a map of Scotland. But that's another story. The GPS is also incredibly useful in this world. But if you haven't got the skill to use the compass to start with, why are you out there? It's all right having the technology, but you've got to be able to use the skills to actually be in the environment. That is what matters. Modern technology is moving us away from that. Modern communication is moving us away from that. When I go onto a big trip now into, say, the Himalayas, one of the biggest questions people ask is, yeah, we're going to do Everest Base Camp. Yes, we're going to go and climb such and such. Can I charge my laptop? Can I charge my tablet? And if the answer is no, people don't want to book on the trip. Many trips now have commercial solar panels, inverters, chargers. A number of companies now are being told if you don't give us commercial Wi-Fi on the base camp, we're not coming. I've got to question why you're having that adventure then. I have got to question why you're going into the mountains. I have got to question what you want to do with your life there. Because if all you want to do is sit on a mobile communications device, why are you there? It's something that is only going to creep in more and more. This is the Tengboche Monastery in Nepal. It's a place where everybody goes on the commercial Everest Base Camp treks. And I get a lot of phone calls from people saying, Nigel, I'd like to go on a great pilgrimage into the mountains. Shall I do Everest Base Camp or Kilimanjaro? That's all people seem to think exists. There's a great much more out there, great many places to go. But people just have this in their head. By the way, at this monastery, you can get Mars bar cake. I think that's why people go. But you can now get telephone service right up the valley to Everest Base Camp. You can get Wi-Fi at a lot of the tea shops because people want to use their devices. I've got to question again, you're going on what you call a pilgrimage, which is great. But do you want to live that pilgrimage attached to social networking? Because that is what people do. We have people seeing some of the most tremendous mountain ranges in the world, but they'll never have a conversation about it because all evening they're doing this. Open your eyes, look around you, see what you see. I'm not telling you not to use it, it's more like use it responsibly. Just as an aside to this, on this same trip we've got a young lad with us who had an iPod, and 2/3 of the way up the mountain it stopped working because of the change in barometric pressure, and he was not a happy bunny because he couldn't listen to music. You are in the most dramatic mountain range in the world. You've got Everest and Lhotse in that plume of cloud, you've got Amadablam to the right, and all you're bothered about is listening to music. I've got to question what you're doing. You're taking away the risk by having the connection of an umbilical cord back to the norm. And being on an adventure is not the norm. It is accepting that risk. This is one of the camps on a peak called Amadablam. By the way, I'm scared of heights, so this is not a great place to be at night. And you can see it's a towering cliff on either side. And we're there one night trying to sleep, rocks poking in our back, and all we can hear is a guy on his mobile ringing home in the middle of the night because of the time difference for 2 hours complaining about how bad he feels. Now, I'm not a violent man. You're in one of the most remote mountain ranges in the world and you're sat on your mobile. People stop and they turn the thing on just to see if they can get service to prove it to people. I've got a question while you're there. Because if you find it, conversation is gone. I was recently in Kenya, this is part of Mount Kenya, and we can get mobile service on most of the mountain. Do you want that umbilical cord though? Do you want that connection to the world around you that you know back at home so well? Or do you want to switch off or just use it occasionally and accept the risk of an adventure? Now, obviously I've been recovered off a mountain, I've seen the dangers of what it can do, I've lived through that. And I absolutely agree with having a method of communication that gets it back to home when you've got problems or to a rescue service, but not to be used willy-nilly every day, day in, day out. You are removing yourself from society by going to these places. You have to accept the risk. I'm very shortly lucky enough to be going to Greenland. Now, there isn't a lot of service on the Greenland ice cap, let me assure you. But let me tell you a little story about one of the camps there. Because Greenland is a remote, huge, white, empty place. Some of the commercial enterprises out there have built static camps now, solid structures, so that they can base their equipment and go out into the mountains, come back and have somewhere to recover and recuperate. And that's great. One or two of the companies then said, we'll fit a router, because we know people are governed by sponsors on a lot of trips these days, and those sponsors pay a lot of money for these people to go on these adventures, and they need updates. I completely agree with you. I don't sometimes agree with the fact that I can send a tweet from the highest point of the planet and you can't. I can make a TV documentary on the highest point of the planet, because I think a lot of it's stunt making. But what I did see was this. In that solid structure, on the edge of the Greenland ice cap, with that router, in 2 weeks, they clocked up a £5,000 internet bill. Because people came in, bogged themselves on, Bluetooth their heads to the world again, and loaded all their pictures, all their data, non-stop, into the web. And nobody talked to each other. People would sit in this place at night, attached to their laptops, just typing and not talking. Now, as I say, I have no problem with using this kind of stuff because we all know it's part of life, but there is a line to draw. When you go out into the mountains or the jungles or a remote part of the world and you accept an adventure, you have to accept a risk. When you're looking, as I have, and been fortunate enough to see insects and beautiful tiny animals in, say, the middles of the Sumatran jungle, I want to experience that moment. I want to be there and see that with my own eyes. What I also see are people there doing the same thing and, on the other hand, complaining about the connection speed to the internet. That is not an adventure. An adventure is accepting the risk and accepting the situation. We also got to think how we communicate to people after we're gone. Because we're here and now, we send messages here and now, we send millions of messages here and now. These are old-fashioned, I know they are, but you'll be able to read them 50 years after I'm dead, and they'll still work. We can still read a Babylonian tablet from 300 BC telling us about what it was like to this day. We can still read the Doomsday Book. The issue we have is recently, on the 900th anniversary of the Doomsday Book, a digital copy was made of it so that everybody could use it digitally. Within 20 years, nobody could read the digital copy because the format to read it had gone. I wonder, in 30 or 40 years' time, the communications that you made on devices like this, I wonder if they will still be there. I wonder if history will still see you. Because we have a very, very dangerous opportunity here. we have an opportunity to record the start of this millennia in less quality than we started recording the century before it, because we build in obsolescence to our communication. We build in things that we will not be able to read in 100 years' time. I'm going to leave you with just a little thought today. We're talking about ideas taking flight. Well, let me leave you with this. If you have an adventure, and please, I hope you do, many of them, do you want your adventure to be driven by your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, and your experiences? And do you want to use that to drive the communication? Or do you want the communication to drive you and your thoughts and your lives and your experiences? You see, what you've got to remember is this, very simply. Do you want your ideas to take flight, or do you want flight to take your ideas? Thank you.